What is the most stunning way you've seen someone throw their life away? My best friend. Late best friend. He was always troubled. He was half blind, middle school dropout, tons of mental health issues, substance abuse. But his soul was absolutely beautiful, 10/10ths amazing person. He met and fell in love with a woman who made him better in every way. She got him his first pair of glasses. His good eye overcompensated, and he had supervision in it. His bad eye began to work. She helped him get his JED. He enrolled in college. She helped him cut back on his drinking and almost all of the substance abuse. He met and connected with a therapist and unpacked his childhood. She took him to get his learner's permit, and he was actually turning out to be a good driver despite his eye. He was so happy. Then one night, they had separate plans. He decided to go on a bender and hung himself. He rose above all the bullshit life handed him up until that moment. He called so many people and yet didn't call anyone who would stop him. No note, no outward signs. It's been 8 years next month. He would have been someone more amazing than he already was. But one night of drinking did him in. My older sister was a professional model, straight A student, a stellar cross-country athlete, and church volunteer. She was offered full-ride scholarships to multiple top-tier universities across the country. She chose a local religious college, got engaged to a professional dancer. In less than a semester he convinced her to drop out of college, quit her job, and drive him out to California where he promptly dumped her. After that she hopped onto the alcoholic train, which was technically just using our dad's coping mechanism for everything. She met another dude who got her pregnant. He convinced her to have a second kid, then left her for another woman as soon as she got pregnant a second time. During that time my little sister moved in with her to help her out, and they discovered meth together. It started out with them abusing my little sister's Adderall. Then midway through her second pregnancy I see her, and she's pregnant AF, and she just looked green. Her movements and speech and the way her skin looked stretched over her body were horrifying. The house my sisters shared was a sty. Dirty diapers, dishes, and garbage everywhere. It reeked of piss, and there were clothes and macup strewn everywhere. They eventually moved in with my dad and his terrible wife, and all of them lived happily methed up after. I estranged myself, but not before I lost every single ounce of respect for my family. I have looked them up in recent years and both of my sisters have been arrested for shoplifting, and the older one has had multiple DUIs. In the Grand Thunderdome, that is high school, I was being bullied pretty badly. One girl, Bella, pretended to be my friend, got my phone number, and gave it out to someone she knew, just so that person could harass me, for funsies. Kept getting harassing text messages for weeks, and I kept telling the jerk to back off, but they had to keep at it. Finally, I told them to quit, or I was going to show it to the principal. Should have done it the first time, I know, but they didn't exactly take me seriously for in-school bullying, and I doubted they'd do anything about cyberbullying, and they threatened to kill me in very descriptive ways, said they'll hurt my family, my pets, and texted me my address too, going, I know where you live. Watch out. Well, apparently this was enough for the principal to launch a manhunt, and they actually found out it was another girl from a different school, who was cousins with Beachella. From what I heard, this cousin was an amazing student who got really good grades, was in our OTC, and was more or less one of the chillest kids. If you didn't know, she had a hobby of harassing people. She got expelled. It was revealed she's done this to other kids, and was thrown into juvie, and we actually had the opportunity to press charges against her. I was all for it, but then some other personal things came up, and we missed the court date. Either ways, her life got badly ruined, and I don't feel a shred of pity for her at all. Guy I played football in HS was an all-world QB who could do it all. Basically he played like a teenage Steve Young, and looked like Ben Affleck. He had scholarship offers from some big-time football schools, but he was always a bit spoiled and used to having things handed to him. He turned the big football schools down to stay close to home and accept a full ride to the same school as his HS girlfriend, a shitty D1AA school with nothing going for it athletically or academically except her. He got there and quit football after a couple of days because they didn't name him starter over their returning all-conference sophomore QB. The girlfriend he'd sacrificed so much to stay with broke up with him by the end of that week and started dating the backup QB he could have beaten out by the end of the month. They are still together 20 years later and have 6 kids. The guy I knew, obviously, lost his scholarship and dropped out of college at the end of the year. He wound up driving an armored car for Loomis Fargo, which wasn't a bad gig, but then one Black Friday he took a bag of cash from Walmart that he was supposed to be delivering to the bank. It didn't take long for them to notice the whopping $11K missing from the deposit he dropped off. He never even got to spend the money. He pled guilty to the felony and works as a personal trainer at the local YMCA now. TLDR, corner store car fentanyl. My cousin and her hubby had a really great life. He worked full time and she mostly stayed home with the kids. Not because they were a traditional couple, but mostly because she was all about being a mother and homemaker. She worked part-time as a doula while going to school to be a midwife. They had a huge house in a nice part of town. Were very involved with family, community and the like. Turned out they were also scamming dozens of doctors for pills. Morphine, Dilaudid, Oxy, Xanax, Valium, Klonopin, you name it. The deeper into addiction they got, the shadier they got. He started stealing from his place of work. She started stealing from retail stores, friends, and family. He lost his job, they lost the house, and moved their entire family into my aunt's 2-bedroom home. By this point they were now snorting heroin and cocaine on top of the pills. Continued to steal. Completely ruined my aunt's house, and then one night, he snuck out of the house in the middle of the night, walked to a local gas station, and bought what he thought was heroin from the guy hanging out there. Turned out it was carfentanil, and he died instantly. In bed next to my sleeping cousin whose daughter found them, and had to wake her mother up, while she tried to also wake her father up. When my cousin woke she obviously freaked out, but she was still too high from the pain pills she took the night before to even begin to handle what was happening. My niece, I call all the kids in my family nieces and nephews. I think technically they are my second cousins, not knowing what to do, called me at like 7 AM in hysterics. I had to call emergency services before rushing over. All of this took place within the course of 4 months and it's so much worse than I can possibly begin to type out. The above are the cliff notes. Everyone tried to get involved and help them. The drugs were more important than their friends, their children and ultimately their lives. My cousin got survivor's benefits for her and all the children. Instead of using it for what it's intended, she spent it on more drugs. It's been 2 years now since the overdose, and she packed her kids up, moved to an even shittier state than where we already lived, and has been busy spending her kids' benefits money on more drugs. Is still stealing from stores. Not for food or something like that. I'm talking clothing, TVS, game systems, etc. She is still begging everyone up here for more money, saying her kids don't have food and they can't afford to survive. She also gets social services benefits, like food stamps and housing and a monthly stipend for living, on top of their survivor's benefits. Last week she was calling everyone telling them her car got stolen and she needed money for that. One of the things her and her husband kept doing during their downfall, they kept wrecking their cars while driving high. Knowing they would get in trouble, they would ditch the car and report it as stolen. They did this to like 5 freaking cars, and I'm not even kidding. I know this because one night, when they were too high to realize who they were talking to, they told me about their genius plan. They were legit proud of themselves for having thought of doing such a thing. I have no idea how they managed to keep getting cars. I haven't had a car in like 15 years because I cannot afford one, and I make decent money. Enough to pay a mortgage and pay my bills and keep tons of food on the table. I have no idea how the same police officers they kept dealing with over these stolen cars didn't question the multiple reports of stolen brand new vehicles from the same couple over the course of such a short amount of time. Thing is, before all of this, before they even got the big fancy house and we were all still close, they were hyper against drugs. Like her and her husband would not talk to me for near to 4 years because I let an old friend of mine stay at my house for a week after he was released from prison. He was in prison for heroin related charges. He wasn't selling, I think he was stealing stuff, and was caught with a bit in his pocket. He sobered up in prison and actually went on to live a pretty decent life. But my point is, my cousin and hubby would not talk to me for years because I allowed my friend to crash with me for 1 week until his housing was ready because he had previously used heroin. Like, what the fuck happened to change their minds on the subject? To make them suddenly collapse into the abyss that is opiate addiction? None of us will ever know because one is dead and the other is lost. Nothing was going on in their lives of such a caliber to warrant sudden behavior like that. It came out of nowhere. I'm no saint, but I've never stolen. I've never begged when things got really hard. I've never even considered using government benefits. There is someone out there worse off than me, and I will maintain that mindset until I'm bedridden and need hospice. Then I will have to rely on benefits most likely, but hopefully not. I've definitely partied in my time. Drinking an occasional line of cocaine at a club when I was still in my 20s. Never touched any opiate, except for in hospitals. Been prescribed opiates after surgeries, and for things like broken bones. Never filled the scripts. 800 mg of ibuprofen will usually handle it. I do smoke pot, but it's prescribed to treat my condition, because I refused to take the pain meds and my doctor became frustrated at my frequent visits. Before the script I had smoked pot maybe twice in my life. I was hesitant to try it as an alternative to pain meds, because I don't like being foggy or unable to get about my day, and that's how the pain pills made me feel, so that's why I didn't take them. Also, I have a sensitive stomach. Not gonna lie. The pot works really well. I'm not foggy, and it minimizes the pain just enough that I can function relatively comfortably. So maybe I'm not in a position to be so upset and frustrated over my cousin and her deceased husband. But I am. I miss her and the kids, and I'm so angry. How could they let this happen to themselves? Addiction is not a disease. It's a death sentence, and we are all just waiting for that call. Not even an entire group of us staging multiple interventions worked. I've tried everything. Everything they tell you to do in regards to how we face addiction these days. Like, I've already mourned her death. Because once that call comes, I'm the brand new proud mother of a family of 4. I won't have time to mourn when it happens. I'm the godmother. I've been a recognized legal guardian for these kids since they were born. I was able to help while they were still here. Now they are almost 1,000 miles away from where I am. The youngest is being sent up to visit grandma in a couple of weeks. Grandma has decided she's not sending the youngest back. Grandma has already hired a lawyer and started custody paperwork. Problem is, different states, different state laws. One state's gonna file for custody, the other is going to file a kidnapping charge. Then the courts are going to bring me in, because like I said, I'm a legal guardian. A living legal guardian. On top of being the godmother. The legal guardian thing is another longer story for another day. I just realized I wrote an entire wall of text. I'm really sorry, and apparently I have some things I need to work out regarding all of this. Thanks for reading to anyone who bothered. This is my contribution to the question. I wish it was a shorter story. I once had a friend I went to high school and college with. He was a narcissist who lied all the time. About everything. About things that didn't matter. He told every woman he saw, every time he saw them, "You look like you've lost weight," because that's what every woman wants to hear, or would blatantly compliment them on their chest size. When girls in his life would fret over him and do things like his laundry or dishes for him, he'd brag that he had them wrapped around his finger. He said that he got things like the latest tech gadget 3 months early, but only mentioned that once they'd already been released, because his dad knows people. His parents were massively in debt, but spent like they were in Congress, and he seemed to feel some pressure to appear rich, even though the rest of us didn't care, and we went to a small college out in the country. He had no drive or ambition beyond keeping up with the geniuses in his head, and flunked or nearly flunked classes with alarming regularity. Despite the fact that he had poor personal hygiene and always bummed liquor off of everyone else, along with always forgetting his wallet when they went out, he had a lot of friends. In high school he kept his weight down due to playing sports and having a set schedule, but that abruptly stopped in college. He gained, literally, about 75 pounds while we were in our first 2 years of college, which he couldn't afford to do at a height of 5 feet 6 inches. When I left college he was still taking classes and took them for 2 more years. I broke off our friendship, but he periodically appears in other people's photos. He's gained about 150 pounds and looks like a perfectly spherical ball with two eyes that are recessed inside of fat folds. He didn't finish college and is still living with his parents at 30 years old, working odd jobs until he hits it rich in business. He was always a good salesman and did well at commission-based places, but spends all the money he earns as fast as he can earn it. He is literally eating and spending himself to death, and it's like watching a car crash in slow motion. Apologies for the long comment. My best friend who I grew up with was happy, healthy, and comfortable being who he was. He's gay. Before we left school and he went to university 5 years ago. He was a hardworking, friendly dude, nice to everyone, and great to hang out with. Moving away from home and getting into a relationship changed him in ways I didn't know possible. He didn't want to finish his course, spent his student finance stupidly, left uni after 2 years, moved in with his boyfriend, and started getting jobs at cheap places like call centers, and getting people to sign up to stuff. Kept quitting because of mental health issues, but he wasn't helping himself, always getting jobs doing what was setting his anxiety and depression off. He's been jobless for about a year now, mooching off his boyfriend, has gained a lot of weight, and refuses to admit that he's gone up 2 clothing sizes to what he used to be. Demands his boyfriend does half the housework, even though he's got a full-time job, has a go at him for not doing his share, and spends his money on expensive non-essentials. He treats his family like shit and blames all his issues on them too. I think the final wake-up call for me, that I've lost the friend I used to love hanging out with, is that he never put effort into meeting up with me, and he's outwardly abusive to his boyfriend who, in my time of knowing him, is an absolute softie who wouldn't hurt anyone. I don't think I want to see him anymore, to be honest. Which hurts since we've known each other for as long as we remember. A lot of these comments are about people who use drugs. My brother became an alcoholic after a bad breakup, which also coincided with a dump truck rear-ending him after work one day. He began abusing the pills he was prescribed. He eventually flipped the Camaro he bought with his settlement money from his previous accident, and ended up getting a court order to go to rehab. After rehab he began just smoking pot. But eventually he met a girl and they moved in together. They have been together now for nearly 5 years and I have a niece. This inspired me to become a harm reduction advocate. I spent 2 years working abroad in humanitarian aid, only to come back to Indiana in the midst of the worst HIV outbreak in US history just an hour away. I have spent the past 2 years listening to people who actively use drugs, people in recovery, and their friends and families. It is important to know that people go deeper into their addictions the more they are stigmatized. Treat people who use drugs by calling them just that, not junkie or addict. They are people and their addictions do not define them, just as someone who has diabetes isn't referred to as a diabetic every time they are mentioned. People who use drugs though damage their family and personal relationships, but no one should ever be written off. People always deserve a chance to improve their lives. Any positive change is a motto of the harm reduction movement. If you know someone who uses, carry Narcan. Know how to use it in an emergency. I've trained 500 plus people on how to use it in my small town. But set your limits and your expectations. Build a support network for yourself. I know many people who have lost it because of a death of a child or because their child was sentenced to decades in prison. You're not alone. This is a national crisis. Even the US Surgeon General has a brother incarcerated because of drugs. I went to medical school with someone in first year. She was native and barely squeaked by, and got in through the special native pool that had lower requirements. She was literally right at the cutoff. When she started, her tribe had given her a pretty hefty check for every year she was in school. $25,000 a year. Our tuition was $16K. She also got a variety of extra scholarships thanks to her ethnic background. I think she was literally being paid $40-60K to go to school. In addition to it, she took out a $150,000 line of credit. Within 1 year, she had squandered all of that money on cocaine, shoes, and purses. She was renting her condo, living with a roommate, and didn't even have a vehicle. Just $150K on coke and shopping. She then proceeded to fail first year. Only 3 people in my class did out of almost 200. The other 2 people studied their ass off all year and passed the retake. She took the summer off to focus on yoga teacher certification instead. Not surprisingly, she then failed the final exam rewrite. According to our medical school policy, she had to retake first year. Despite her ongoing academic failures, the dollar sign just kept rolling in, and she milked her status for everything. Newspaper articles about how she is an inspiration, etc. While she was redoing first year, the only person in forever with that honor, she started dating some total loser. He was in his 4th year philosophy degree and going to law school, although when my friends and I met him, we all felt he was very odd and not the brightest bulb in the box. Within 2 months, she got knocked up from him, because what better decision to make with your life at that point? He then became abusive, which culminated with him breaking into her apartment when she was there with a friend and beating both of them. She's pregnant at this point, with twins just to make things more exciting. He ended up in prison and with a restraining order against her, so obviously his law career, which none of us believed would ever happen anyway, was immediately over. After prison, she bragged to everyone how he was studying to get his commercial driver's license. Oh, how the mighty have fallen from lawyer to trucker in a matter of a few months. He then, of course, managed to fail that as well. In the meantime, she failed first year medical school again. 2nd time in a row. As per the school calendar, she would now be expelled. Yet she once again used her ethnic background to ask for special treatment, and somehow, she was granted this. A lot of us had issues with it, because we are talking a profession that deals with people's lives every day. This isn't basket weaving. She got to rewrite her exam yet again. When she was 7 months along, a friend attended the baby shower. Most of us either distanced ourselves of our own volition, or were told to go away, because we were bad and unsupportive, and apparently the mother was snorting cocaine. She eventually gave birth to the twins, and became a single mom. She somehow got the med school to agree to put her on a part-time track, which involved her doing 1 rotation on, 1 rotation off. Thankfully for the general public, she never completed the degree. Don't know which point she finally failed at for good, but we all knew she would never pass licensing exams anyway. Last time I heard of her, she had even more kids, and was in love with another native dude down across the border, and was planning to move down to the US and become a physician's assistant. It was quite spectacular to watch her being given all these incredible opportunities and squandering them all in a methodical fashion. Cost the taxpayers hundreds of thousands of dollars. TLDR at bottom. Had a friend from high school who didn't have much of a plan for what he wanted to do after. Spent the last year skipping class to play Yu-Gi-Oh. Grades were good enough to graduate, but not get into college or university. He was too lazy to learn a trade, thought it was beneath him. He figured he was better suited for something in it, so he got his parents to shell out about $30k for Trios College's IT program. He did okay there, then went on to an internship with one of those third-party shops that fixes electronics. He was doing okay there too until he was tasked with fixing a really expensive Apple device. I think it was one of those all-in-one monitor/CPU ones, forget the name. Anyway, he faked by using too much glue and completely ruined the entire thing. The shop owner was pissed because he had to pay the customer something like $5,000. Apparently, the shop owner was willing to forgive him for it because he was doing great up until then, but my friend yelled back and walked out of the place. He had a hard time finding another internship because the first shop owner didn't give him a reference and told the college about the incident. College eventually let him graduate without completing the internship, but he couldn't find any at work because he lacked references. Started working at a pizza place for cash under the table. Everything was going great until he faked up an order and the manager yelled at him for it. Did the same thing, yelled back and walked out. He had a hard time finding work because of his lack of references and piss poor way of dealing with his employers. His parents started having issues, probably because of the $30k hole he left them in. They split up. Mom was moving way out of the city to a really small town where meaningful employment is hard to come by, but she would let my friend live with her. Dad was staying in the city, but told my friend he had to find his own place because he wasn't going to take care of him anymore. Friend was about 21 at that point. Another friend who worked in construction got my friend a general labor job that paid about $1K a week in cash, bought him all the necessary tools and gear, got him a deal on a basement apartment for $500 a month, and offered to drive him to and from work every day. Sheet friend quit halfway into day one and sat in the pickup truck until they went home. Admittedly, it was hard work, 10-hour days, starting at 6 a.m. and ending at 4 p.m. with an hour-long commute, Monday to Friday. But given the situation he was facing, homeless if he stayed in the city, or moving away from all your friends, I might have sucked it up a bit. He moved with his mom a month later, then blamed the rest of the friend group for not trying to keep in contact with him, or going out to see him. We offered to pay the train fare, but he kept refusing. TLDR, a friend who had a pretty good mind for it screwed every chance he got because he couldn't admit when he faked up or take criticism from bosses. Ended up having to leave all of his friends behind because he couldn't find employment in the city. Off the top of my head, it would have to be my mother with her fantasy life. She didn't want. She had to have things a certain way, pretty much identical to her own parents. She needed to be a SAHM, a super mom, and she had her kids' lives planned out, and it was supposed to be this Pleasantville style life. She's been married and divorced twice, plus the boyfriends who didn't work out because she's psycho and has no standards outside of country boy and Christian. She has an awkward relationship with her gay son, pretty sure they only have a relationship because he's always been her golden child, and no relationship with me, her daughter, in large part because she was a goddamn terrorist to me since I refused to fit into the mold she had envisioned for me, and through faking up her relationship with me, she's also lost access to her only grandchild, who she also had so many plans for. She now lives alone in a 3-bedroom house in the middle of nowhere that's really starting to show its age because there's no man around to do maintenance, complaining about empty nest. She never got anywhere career-wise either because she held on to her SAHM dream until the last, faking minute, waiting for a man to swoop in and make it possible until I was in college and my brother almost done with high school. Then she goes back to school to be a nurse and now works in hospice as of a few years ago. I'll be amazed if she ever makes management because she never had the drive to make it past mediocre paper pusher in an office. Her current mistake is a trashy redneck who's on round 2 of what I like to refer to as my mother's boyfriend merry-go-round, in which she dates a guy, breaks up with him, dates some other guy, but maintains contact with past guys, and ends up circling back around to them all sooner or later. He's got no career. He sold us my first car at a dealership. He's been a dog groomer at some point. Last I heard he was cleaning out foreclosed houses or something. And that's just what I know about. And I'm pretty sure he's looking at my mother as his retirement plan, since he probably can't even spell 401k. But her credit score is immaculate. She likes to brag about that. Well, like most of these stories, it was opioids. My wife knew this family with a massive ranch filled with cows, oil wells, and wind turbines. He moved back in his 40s to run the place and basically didn't wake up one morning. I did a back of a cocktail napkin calculation and figured if he just checked the mail every month he was probably bringing in 100k plus easy, probably much more. Sure, that kind of money would be hard to deal with, but that's why they make fancy CPAs and whatnot. To think of what he could have done, besides getting faked up every day, blows my mind. Personally, I would buy a Bell 500 helicopter, paint it just like Magnum pies, and zoom around all day. Edit, I'll add a more positive one. I knew a guy in high school that worked very hard and got into a top college. Well, senior year of HS he freaks out and starts doing every drug he could find. I think a result of his parents being very strict to the point of assholes. He goes off to college, instantly flunks out, and returns to our hometown to be a cook at Chili's. He continued doing drugs. He knocks up some waitress and everything is going down the tubes. Now I'm not sure how he got the job, but I think his parents hooked him up with some basic it gig at a research center. He still did drugs of course, but he pushed himself 100% into the work. This was right before the internet took off, and anyone that had basic knowledge of networking and security were going to make bank. And that's what he did. He is now some super well paid consultant that still smokes weed. Sorry for weird grammar and syntax. I'm using speech to text. I'm pretty sure my sister is a sociopath. She had a lot going for her. When we were young she was constantly praised about her looks. Often to my detriment, because let us just say I was not quite as blessed in that department. She was smart. She wanted to be a vet tech. She was going places. And then she got a boyfriend at 13 years old. 14 she decided to try fentanyl at a party. Started being unpredictable, like things that wouldn't bother a normal person would set her off into violence, whereas something that a normal person should be upset about wouldn't even faze her. She became cunning and manipulative. I think she always was, but it just got worse as she got older. Lies upon lies upon lies. And when she was caught in a lie, she would just change her lie to suit her. She has no remorse or regard for anyone around her. One time she stole my bank card, wrote out a fake check, deposited into my bank account, and then withdrew it from a machine. And then once the bank inevitably figured out that it was a fake check, I was the one investigated for fraud. I was eventually found innocent because the handwriting on the check did not match mine, and the video that was taken at the machine did not show me, but a man, and she would become physically abusive if I ever tried to stand up for myself against her manipulation. She just didn't care about the consequences of her actions and never seemed to learn or ever had any remorse for anything she's ever done to our family. Come to think of it, while she did have some hobbies and passing interests, she never actually had any passions or anything that she was deeply interested in. All of her interests just seemed so superficial. She had 2 kids. One was born addicted to heroin. The other got taken away by child services. Now she is currently on bail for dealing heroin and fentanyl along with her boyfriend, as well as many shoplifting charges. I'm hoping she gets prison. I just think back to that little girl I knew who seemed so innocent. I barely recognize the woman she has become, and I don't know if I can ever call her my sister again. She had her whole life ahead of her, and she just threw it away for cheap thrills. Actually, it's gotta be an ex-coworker of mine. I live in a rural area of the USA where you basically crave heroin if you cross the wrong county line. I trained this girl a few weeks ago. She was super enthusiastic, as good jobs in areas like this are rare. Her spot paid significantly above minimum wage because she had a clean driving record. We desperately need drivers because rural teenagers like to obliterate their driving records, not thinking it will ever come back to haunt them. She was in her late 20s and had 4 kids. Unusual, but she seemed like a sweet person. Super happy to have a job, ready to take on full-time hours, and move between shifts, an extreme rarity here. Welp, about 2 weeks ago, my boss, the site manager, I'm a supervisor, calls me at 8 AM, after I'd gotten home at midnight, so I know it isn't good. This very new employee had been arrested and charged with 2 felonies, and one was a domestic violence. In this field, a violent misdemeanor means losing state licensing. A violent felony? Nope. My boss didn't know the details other than the person has been indefinitely suspended, as is routine. I found out today that she got really high on something and almost beat one of her kids to death. I was absolutely not expecting that. You could have given me 100 guesses and I wouldn't have gotten close. She would have had a solid, stable job here, with great benefits and almost no cost for adding children to the coverage, the same schedule each week, etc. I still really have no clue what actually went down, but to me, it looks like she literally threw her life away. I don't know how she'll come back from this, and I feel so awful for her kids, because from what she told me, the father is a piece of shit, so they'll probably end up in foster care, or in the care of family, which is a big dice roll in this area. Worked with a guy that was bit high strung. But aside from that, was a really nice guy, and we had some good conversations. But he worked on a different shift, so we only overlapped for about an hour. There was talk that he drank, and then later, that he was an alcoholic. He would sometimes come to work with cuts and bruises, and he'd say he fell down or something vague. But we knew he was either getting into bar fights, or just stumbling around drunk, and passing out and hitting something. His work was lacking a bit, and he was ostracized by most of his shift. Eventually the company had to lay a couple people off, and I think the rest of us got our hours cut back for a few months. He was one of the few to be let go. He sued the company, from what I'm told, because the company knew of his alcohol problem and didn't give enough resources for him, which I don't know if it's true or not. Rumor has it, he got some sort of settlement out of it, and that was that. We never saw again. That was until a coworker said he thinks he saw him walking down the street and that he looked really rough. About a year or two after that, we had this terrible ice storm in the city. It knocked power out all over the city for a few days. Very cold temperatures for several days. Another editor found his lifeless body laying on the sidewalk outside a grocery store in the city. Apparently he had been homeless for 2 years. I learned after that a coworker said that he had told her that he had been homeless before. The odd thing was, he had an inheritance from his father's estate that sent him monthly checks. Enough money that he could live on it with or maybe have a small income to subsidize it. However, he kept moving and disappearing, and the lawyer involved in the estate couldn't track him down to give him the money he was to have. He also had a sister across the country that would have taken care of him. But instead, alcohol was too much of a draw, and we figure he drank some hard liquor, felt warm enough, and laid down on the sidewalk on one of the coldest days of the year. We learned about it at work from a small blurb in the newspaper a couple days later. A homeless advocacy group erected a small memorial where he had died with pictures of his childhood. Not sure where they got them. I made sure I took a trip to the spot to say goodbye. We weren't close by any means, but I never had an issue with him and always thought of him as a good guy. He definitely didn't deserve to die freezing cold on the sidewalk. General trigger warning. Discussion of abuse, drugs, rap. My friend has always had only one foot in reality. She's sweet, if a little gullible and naive. She and I would read together. She had good grades and was a wonderful student. When she got out of high school, she had a lot of scholarship offers. But she's always managed to pick abusive guys. Ever since her first relationship, she's gone for men that act sweet at first, until they don't. Rather than seeing a pattern, she seems to be unable to see a pattern, or realize that someone who acts sweet can possibly have a bad side. When she was 19, she moved in with a guy to escape her home situation. She's grown up in a less than stellar home life, with a mother who pretty much neglected her, and grandparents who tried to make up for it by spoiling her. Said guy turned out to be a total monster who did terrible things to her, like pimping her out for drugs, and making her be a cam girl, to try and make money, as well as beating the crap out of and choking her. All of this, while she worked retail and barely could make ends meet. She wound up getting pregnant and giving birth. This triggered a round of multiple sclerosis. Apparently, her mother had manuscript, the symptoms getting worse, when she had my friend's half-brother. She managed to escape the abusive relationship, as the man just became horrible all the time, and never went back to the apology side of the abuse. She has custody of her son and loves him dearly. The dad either can't or won't see him, which is fine. The throwing the life away part comes from her jumping into a relationship and getting pregnant, then announcing 3 weeks later she was engaged to the father of her second child, who was married and had a child of his own. His wife basically let him do what he wanted, who he wanted, as long as she was number one. He convinced my friend that he was going to break up with his wife to be with her, and she believed him. Everyone had told her to take time for herself and her child, to get her head on straight and back on her feet, even offering to let her stay at their places or give her money assistance until she was stable again. She did not accept their help. Instead, she decided to hook up with this guy. Dude isn't much to look at either. He's average. He is broke because he refuses to get a job and is constantly trying to get money from her to turn around and blow it on stupid crap, while my friend's grandmother is paying her bills. She had baby number 2 and the manuscript flared horribly, and she was unable to work. To my knowledge, she's still waiting on her back pay from disability. He said he was getting her name and Elvish tattooed on himself, but he got his wife's name tattooed on himself instead. A few months into the relationship, he started beating her just as bad and got into drugs, just like her ex. She even implied he started beating her oldest son as well, who is maybe 5 at the oldest. His father even harasses her, giving her number out to random people who call her at all hours and threaten and harass her. To make up for the lack of money, she lets so many people come in and out of her house who take advantage of her kindness and leave her house a mess, steal her sheet, or do drugs around her children. Everyone tells her to leave him. She is also constantly posting her woes on Facebook, only to delete them when everyone points out the obvious solution. The police have been called, but she refuses to press charges, saying he will change. People have gotten tired of it, or have children of their own, and don't want to be around a clearly unstable person. So, she's lost a lot of friends, surrounding herself with people who feed into her delusion. She's never really been able to face reality, but now it's gotten her into full denial mode. I wish her the best, and that she will find the strength to leave him. The boyfriend recently got arrested for rap. Have no details, only seen her posting and ranting on Facebook, and hauled off to jail. I hope the separation and the disability make her realize that she doesn't need that in her life. We do crazy things for love, or when we fall out of relationships, but please, if you are reading this, and in an abusive relationship, I promise you there are people who care about and love you. There are options to get help. Don't allow yourself to get dragged down further when you feel low. You're worth more than that. A buddy of mine graduated top of his class in high school, president of the student council, student leader in the National Honor Society, won awards for his community service. He smoked pot for the first time at a graduation party and something inside of him clicked. It was honestly like something out of Reefer Madness. I wouldn't believe it if I hadn't seen it happen in real time. He flunked out of college a month or two into the first semester because all he wanted to do was get high alone in his dorm room. He moved back home and went on unemployment. He smokes morning until night, all day every day. He won't go anywhere where he isn't able to smoke continuously, although vape pens have admittedly made that easier. He mostly works menial odd jobs now because he needs to be able to work stoned and can't risk getting drug tested. Now, before anyone gets on my case, I don't think weed is to blame. I smoke all the time. I have friends who get high just as much as he does and live normal, productive lives. My buddy clearly had latent mental health issues that manifested through a substance abuse problem. Still, it's notable because it was just so night and day. He found the drug that worked for him and couldn't let it go. Honestly, I'm grateful that is only weed and not fent or coke or booze, because I don't think he'd still be around if that was the case. Very tame compared to some of these, but here we go. Went to college to study music tech and drama. I was 16, fresh out of school. Halfway through the first term we got a new lecturer, Cassandra. One time Cassandra randomly decided to pretend to go into labor, and we had to pretend to deliver her baby. She laid on her back with her legs spread whilst huffing and puffing whilst a bunch of 16-year-old kids all just stared into her abyss in shock, a sign of things to come. 2 weeks later I was feeling very ill, had a big dose of man flu. Poor me. During a break I was laid on the floor in the drama hall on one of those blue mats you would use for P.E. lessons, feeling sorry for myself. Cassandra came over and climbed onto my back. She sat squatted on my ass and proceeded to slowly massage my whole back and shoulders whilst saying things like, "Oh yeah, this will make you better." This went on for about 30 minutes whilst I just lay there paralyzed with awkwardness. A couple of days later I was interviewed by the head of department and the head of the college. They wanted to know how it made me feel, and if I was upset. I just said it was weird and made me feel awkward. We never saw Cassandra again after that, and I doubt she'll have been able to work in teaching again. 20 years, my wife is a college lecturer, and it wasn't until I randomly mentioned it to her that she explained how bad it actually was. It was hugely unprofessional and borderline assault. Very tame compared to some stories, but I doubt Cassandra ever worked in teaching again. It'll have taken a few years for her to get qualified in the first place too. Allow me to introduce my brother. He was always a smart social kid, but he was lazy. He got into the highest level of high schools you can get, right below the level for gifted children. At those high schools he got 6 years, standard. He got through the first 4 years without any trouble. Then he had to redo the 5th year. and then he had to redo the 6th year after that. He took up smoking and started doing weed. In total, he spent 8 years at that high school. He was still lazy, didn't do any work, and then he managed to fail his finals that final year at age 20. He was kicked out of school, went to adult school, and stopped after just a few months, claiming the travel costs were too expensive. My mother made a deal with him before that. He'd stop smoking, and she'd pay for his traveling. He started smoking again, so she stopped paying. That's why the costs were becoming too expensive for him. He didn't have a job till he was 21 and instead borrowed money from my parents. At some point, he started stealing. I saved up quite a bit of money in cash, and he stole 100 euros from me, which was quite a bit back then for me, cause it took me months to save up with no job. While I was still in high school, I was sick a lot, so my mum told me it was best not to take on a job and instead focus on school, which I did. My brother has no diploma, no degree, nothing. In my country you either get extremely lucky with a good job that doesn't require you to have at least a high school diploma, or you work a dead-end job that won't pay nearly enough to get your own place and live off of that small paycheck. He could've had it all. He could've gone to college and the options would been endless. Instead he nearly ended up in the gutter, going down the wrong path, stealing from people close to him, being high as a kite half of the time, or being sheet-faced drunk at some party at 3 in the morning, and not returning till 5 in the morning, still wasted, to wake up in the afternoon with a massive hangover. Now he's finally pulling himself straight again, but he blew it, and he knows that. Needless to say, he was the perfect example of how I didn't want to turn out, which motivated me to do better in school, so I wouldn't end up in a similar situation with a sucky job and stuck living at my parents' place for the next 5+ years. In October 2003 we met. He helped me to get out of the drug scene, which was a recent addition to my life at 21. We moved in together and started working for a company building displays in home improvement stores and decided to move to an adjacent state. 3 years later, in 2006 he wanted to try drugs. He went straight for meth and located a dealer far too fast for my liking. Fearing I would spiral back into the drug scene, I told him, we can do it once, together, safely, but then we'll be done forever. We did, and that was over. He wanted to go back to it a few weeks later, so I told him, I can't do that, my life would be in jeopardy. If he wants to go that direction, he'll go alone and end up in one of two places, prison or the grave. He opted for the drug, and I left him and returned to our home state and my parents' house. Fast forward to 2007, we aren't friends or communicate about anything. Now, he's on the run from the police for drug-related crimes, distributing, manufacturing, etc. They catch him, hit him with a 10-year sentence, and off he goes. He completes a drug rehab program and gets out early for that, and good behavior sometime in early 2014. Now, we were very close, and the entire time he was in prison we communicated on the phone and via email. We talked at length about his second chance at life and what he would need to do to succeed. I even drove him from prison across an entire state to the halfway house he was assigned. After I dropped him off, all communication stopped abruptly. Fast forward to 2019, still no word at all. Everything I heard through friends was not good. It seemed he had gotten right back into drugs and was not at all on the path he spoke of whilst in prison. I looked him up online, through state and federal public court records, and found out the following. He was charged again with distributing and manufacturing methamphetamine. Being his second offense, he is not eligible for any sort early release. He will be in prison until 2028. I'm so proud for not allowing myself to be dragged back into something he helped me quit years earlier. The saddest part of all of this, and what still brings a tear to my eye, is that he has a son, who in 2003 was 2 years old. He grew up without a father, and now his son is doing exactly the same. TLDR, drugs, prison, drugs, no father. Might get buried, but here goes. I was in a group of about 16 people who were training to become a student in Germany, learning German, how things work there, etc. One of us was, presumably is, a spoiled brat who constantly skipped class to go to the big city, and in general didn't/wouldn't take any of this seriously. The whole training thing cost around $1,500 for accommodations, food, and classes, and an additional $10,000 to deposit in a German bank for all living cost. Might not sound a lot for people in the first world, but the total amount is about the same as an average office worker backquote's salary for 2 years. So you can see that I find this really disturbing. I challenged her about this, and she literally shrugged everything off and said that I worry too much and that I should try to find more satisfaction in life. We ended up going to Germany on the same plane, and I almost immediately got accepted into a 2-semester long entry course to a university. She didn't backquote and had to do more German courses in the meantime. Guess what? She didn't backquote take this seriously either. I checked her Instagram and all she had done in 1.5 years here in Europe is traveling across Europe and definitely not studying in a university, which in case you forgot, was the reason she was here in the first place. In case you ask, no, I haven't backquote got in contact with her much, or at all, for obvious reason. TLDR, someone I know spent $11,500 for training courses and living costs to go to Germany, only to not do it at the end and travel across Europe instead. Last year, a buddy from HS got accepted into a D1 college across the country with a full ride. He literally had the most comfortable life ahead of him, and what does he do? He goes out there, spends a day in his dorm, decides he doesn't like it, and comes back to LA because he didn't like college, missed everyone and his girlfriend. This was a huge shocker to everyone that was friends with him. All of us knew that he wasn't very bright, but this was beyond stupid for his usual self. Soon as he got back, his girlfriend broke up with him. She was planning on shadow breaking up with him since she was going to school in Scotland and didn't want to see him anymore. His parents kicked him out, and he temporarily moved onto a HS buddy's couch, and about 90% of his friend group thinks he's a complete idiot for wasting a massive opportunity, and is now suffering the consequences. Now he works minimum wage at a grocery store, and goes to a really bad community college near where he lives, and hangs out with the 2 to 3 people from HS that stayed in LA, and didn't abandon him. I only hung out with him in high school cause our friend group's mixed. But he was always pretty street and book dumb, so you couldn't really have any conversations with him that weren't completely brain numbing. This whole ordeal was a massive ordeal within our friend group, and was basically the pinnacle of stupid. A year later, he takes each day one at a time, and basically survives paycheck to paycheck. Stunning, but only for how fucking stupid it was. TLDR, idiot fails to fiddle expenses and loses everything. Bit of background. My place of work is a large, global business. Our site has over 6,000 people on site, and we have to occasionally send teams of operations people to a different site for work. While away, the business pays a very generous amount of expenses, provides a company car and pays for all fuel costs. They also reimburse dry cleaning costs, as a lot of the work in operations can be very dirty, and so overalls need dry cleaning regularly. On site at home it's fine, because they have an internal setup, but working away they reimburse any costs for dry cleaning. A colleague who I'd worked with for several years was on the cusp of landing himself a big promotion. We are talking a jump from somewhere in the £30k per year to the low £40k a year range. All because of a very fortunate set of circumstances that saw 3 of his direct managers leave the business. He found himself looking at the top job, being the most experienced on the team. He was sent off site for work. While away he required his overalls to be cleaned several times. I should point out that, while working off site, the going rate was around £1,000 a week, on top of his wage, and as I mentioned, all his expenses, fuel and dry cleaning are covered. He was there for 5 weeks. He returns to our site, and a week after he submitted his receipts for his dry cleaning, he's pulled into a one-to-one meeting, escorted by security off-site, and he's never seen again. He had been fiddling the receipts for the dry cleaning, which cost around £10-15. He was adding a 0 on the end to claim back hundreds per wash. He'd been off-site working several times before, and they checked back on all his old receipts. All the same, he'd swindled the company out of thousands over the years doing this. So he was sacked. You may be wondering, other than who the hell charges £100 plus for dry cleaning overalls, how did he get caught? Well, he failed to realize that the ink on one of the receipts was blue and used a red pen to add his zero on the end. I've seen him since. He's now divorced, living in a one-bedroom flat sharing with contractors, and struggles with working because he stole so much money from his employer. This one girl I know is currently in the middle of doing this. This time last year, she had just gotten engaged to a great guy, and they had just bought a house together. She works a great manager level position, has great group of friends and employees, looks like she's living her best life, always smiling. A couple months ago, her fiancé lost his job. All of a sudden, she's unhappy in the relationship and leaves him. Then only a couple weeks later, she starts dating one of her employees, possibly was seeing him before leaving the fiancé, a guy she swore she hated and who has multiple sexual harassment claims against him. She then moves in with him. She had hired one of our mutual friends to work under her, and then immediately talks shit behind the friend's back, saying how annoying she is and how bad she is at her job. She's not. She's a phenomenal friend and a hard worker. Starts treating her different to her face. Then it turns out she's leaving the manager position to take another one at a different place, leaving the friend she hired struggling. Apparently, she was applying at other places before even hiring the friend. Also comes to light that she had been stealing money from work and petty cashing everything. At least over $500. She stole an employee from another property, not the friend, a different employee. All the corporate people are talking, and there's a whole case about her now. It's like she built this great life, and in 2 months, completely burnt any and all bridges. Crazy how you can know someone for so long before their true colors start to show. No drugs, no alcoholism, no pregnancy. My high school friend literally messed up her life with negative thinking. It happened over many years. Looking back, she could have made all her dreams come true, but she constantly told herself and everyone around her that she wasn't good enough. It started as a way to get attention and fish for compliments, but people tire of doing that, and after repeating these self-flagellating beliefs to herself for so long, she finally came to believe them. She constantly wailed about being ugly and fat. She was only slightly padded. In high school she had her dream boyfriend, a sporty jock with good looks who treated her like a queen. She would constantly say she didn't deserve him. She also dreamed of becoming a writer, but would tell everyone she was so afraid of criticism that she couldn't bear to edit her own work or have anyone else edit it. Newsflash, writing well requires a lot of editing. She had great grades in school, was sociable, sporty, involved in clubs and societies. Her parents were devoted and supportive and sent her to the expensive university she wanted to go to because it had a thespian vibe. Adoring boyfriend followed her there. She ended up cheating on him, confessing to him, and breaking his heart. Then repeating that pattern with numerous other really good guys she dated. It seemed to me she was testing her desirability and seeking validation by having both a stable boyfriend and one night stands, and then the added validation of seeing the boyfriend being hurt was an ego boost to her. Still constantly talked about being overweight and ended up gaining a lot of weight so that it actually was true. After about 5 great boyfriends, by which time most people we knew were lucky to have found one good partner, she decided her quota of good guys was up. She had messed up all her chances at a good relationship and did not deserve any more. She refused to play the game of actively seeking a partner, convinced that that was an artificial way of finding a life partner. This was in the days before online dating, and just stopped dating. Every negative interaction with a male afterwards, a groping guy, an inappropriate comment, etc., was proof to her that she is no longer deserving of good guys. Still constantly talked about wanting to write but not being able to accept criticism, about not deserving a good man, about being fat, being ugly, fishing for compliments, but now totally believing her self-talk. She eventually took a low-paying job that is not writing, lives alone, struggles financially, and alienated herself from all her former friends because she believes they no longer want her around since they are all married with 2.5 kids and white picket fence houses. She wanted the white picket fence too, but she thought it was cute to say she didn't deserve it, and she manifested that in her life. My mom. Parents were married, had a nice, big house in a great neighborhood. They had started a family, me, and were making upwards of $200K together. My mom was super smart with numbers and was running my grandpa's small business. For some reason, for many of my relatives, my mom didn't feel like she deserved everything she had going for her. So when I was 4 or 5, she asked for a divorce, which was a relatively smooth and easy one comparative to the nasty ones you hear about. They had joint custody of me. One of her few friends that wasn't connected to my dad introduced her to Bag. The relationship between her and Bag started off mostly tame. No huge red flags other than his obvious lack of intellect/education and in-your-face white trashedness. Then the economy crashed, and my grandpa's small business started to go under. Then they started partying pretty hard, drinking heavily most nights of the week, driving around me and Bag's kids while under the influence. My mom must have thought the company is doomed anyway, so she started stealing from the company, and of course it was quickly dissolved. I'm not sure how much of this my grandpa even knows. Mom and Bag work odd jobs to make ends meet. I found out later that she cooked the books and stole several thousand from a synagogue she worked for briefly. They moved out to the Botanies, a good 45-hour drive away, so that no one could drop in. I'm still going back and forth between mom and dad's, and getting old enough to the point where I'm noticing a stark difference in the level of care I was receiving at each house. Then one day, when I'm in 7th or 8th grade, Bag's sister calls up my dad and informs him that mom and Bag are addicted to crack. There was some speculation that there was more than just drinking going on, however no one was able to confirm it. So mom and dad go to court. Dad gets full custody and mom now has supervised visitation with me once every other week. She's verbally remorseful for everything, however behavior doesn't change for several years. She finally gets busted at her dealer's house and then has to report to the courts. She's in and out of jail for a couple of short stints until one intervention finally sticks. She gets sober and moves into my grandpa's house for a few months. He hooks her up with a car and a job, so she's able to get an apartment closer to the area that I grew up. Her custody is restored, and I'm back to living 50% with mom by my junior year. A few months after she gets her apartment, Bag moves back in. He has a couple short runs of sobriety, but doesn't really ever stick with it. Fast forward 12 years, my mom is still sober, holding down a good job, but has zero savings and zero retirement, because she has been providing for deadbeat Bag and his medical issues, his trucks, his motorcycles all this time. Like what the fuck? He's never had a job, he goes off on benders, and comes home and verbally attacks her. She does the same back, so she doesn't feel justified to leave him to fend for himself. About 9 months ago, she finally tries to kick his ass out. He refuses to leave the house that is solely in her name, that he does not contribute a dime to. She leaves, sleeps on my uncle's air mattress for 4 months, while she takes him to court, so that he can legally be removed. Yes, it took this long to get a judge to order him out of her house. He's finally out of the house, but she still receives multiple harassing phone calls on a daily basis from other people's phones, since he is blocked. Even though at Tucker Coon's age, I'm so proud of her for taking her life back. My brother, holy cow. We had a tough childhood, I'll give you that, but there's a point where you need to stop actively playing the victim in every scenario in your life. I feel like it started when he got in a relationship with an incredibly narcissistic and messed up girl. She basically leeched off him their entire relationship. She then dumped him while telling of her plan to going down a hole to protest the building of a motorway. He ended up in a bunch of news articles as the jilted ex-boyfriend, and it messed with his head a bit. He's a nice guy, so he stuck around for the entire thing, telling all the journalists that they actually broke up. They kinda painted him like a creep just waiting around for a girl no longer interested, which TBH is kinda what he was doing. He kept complaining about how she treated him instead of acknowledging that he'd let yet another narcissist into his life. Scorpion and the Frog. Don't invite a scorpion to be your girlfriend and be shocked when she stings you. Jump forward. He's squatting with a community of squatters in an old warehouse. Another article gets written and he lets them print his faking name. Guess what, bro? Squatting is illegal. He gets a court order on him. Again, instead of going to court and paying what would likely have been a €200 fine that mum and dad would have happily paid because he was the GC. Parents are abusive narcissists, use money as a power play for me, but as a coddling tool for him. His plan was to skip it completely and move to Vietnam for a couple years until the charge was dropped. My parents supported this plan. He left, by the way Vietnam was his idea, because his girlfriend at the time was going on Erasmus to Vietnam for 4 months. They broke up while away. Duh. He eventually came back and is now squatting on his rich friend's second property in return for free rent. He's supposed to be caretaking the grounds, but he's mostly just becoming a hoarder of useless junk. 2. First was a manager at a very successful pair of Korean bakeries in the town I work. She was doing extremely well, lived by herself in one of the luxury high-rises a town over, where a one-bedroom is $3,500 a month, drove a brand new G-Class, and was about to get a promotion to area manager, where she would get a significant raise. Suddenly, she was just gone and replaced. I assumed she had gotten the promotion, so I asked the new manager what happened. Turns out, she had been stealing from the company for years, right out of the registers at the end of the night. Not a lot, just enough. Nothing on most nights, but a $20 some nights, a $100 here and there. Small enough amounts infrequently enough that it was easy to hide without raising eyebrows. But, like anybody in her position, she started to get cocky and started taking more and more, stealing actual goods, etc. Eventually she got caught, fired, and probably blacklisted from every Korean business in the area. The new manager said last he heard, she was moving to California to be with family. Who knows? Such a crazy throwaway of a really successful career for such a bad reason. It's not like the stealing was supporting her lifestyle. Second was my mom's friend. She was a super successful stylist. Owned her own spa/styling place in a really upscale town. A basic haircut cost $150. She was doing insanely well, always dressed in designer clothes, rubbed elbows with really powerful people, had clients that were celebrities and professional athletes. Home life was great, 2 kids that went to private schools, oldest got a full ride to a great university, etc. etc. Suddenly, she get divorced out of nowhere and quickly remarries this guy she met who was in a moderately successful metal band, sells her business, and starts going on tour with him. Every time she comes home she looks worse and worse. Her kids have totally stopped talking to her, and she has started asking friends for money. It's crazy. Behold, the tragedy of my high school's football team. A little background. The team had won several consecutive state titles, so the players were all high in demand. A 16-year-old sophomore who was 6 feet 7 inches and had serious interest from 4 state universities. None of them were big secretary names, but for a sophomore, having several legitimate schools is huge. His first ever girlfriend broke up with him, and he committed suicide. A senior who was the #11 college pick in the country was arrested several times after graduating high school. He bounced between a few college teams, at least one was a major secretary school, but never went anywhere after, because he later violated parole. One of our running backs also made it to a different secretary team, but he could not stop faking up. He was arrested for assault his freshman year. He was also penalized for unsportsmanlike conduct, and later went to jail on some domestic violence charge. He was dismissed from the team. A lineman who graduated and was off to a non-secretary school was arrested for selling weed. The charge was serious enough for the NCAA to disqualify him from playing. He lost his scholarships. Basically, these guys had the world handed to them on a silver platter. Some of them even had NFL potential. Anyway, these are some of the more notable examples, but the entire team's history after high school was just tragic. It's almost like they were given a list of things they shouldn't do, but did every single one of them. Kid at my school came covered in tattoos head to toe, dressed like some trashy hotshot rapper. He got on the amphitheater and started rapping. He caught the attention of his friends and they started cheering him on and following along. He eventually caught the attention of school security. Security is mandatory in my district. He confronted this kid and was immediately cursed out because he was interrupting his beats. He was told to go to the office. He continued to curse him out, calling him the N-word and all this junk, insulting police officers. This trade student from India was not only ruining his career options by defacing himself, but also being a full-blown racist to a African American police officer. The kid was a third the size of the officer, but still had the audacity to flip him off, spit at his feet, and continue to insult him. The officer tried to restrain the kid, but the skinny little shrimp was able to wiggle free. He scurried off toward me and snatched my jacket off my shoulder. I instinctively put my foot out and tripped his scrawny ass face first into the concrete. He didn't make it far. I grabbed my jacket and held him down long enough for the security guard to cuff him. I got a thanks from the office that day. Apparently this kid watched too much YouTube videos on famous rappers and wanted to fit in. He snuck out one night to a friend's house who was taking tattoo classes and got himself turned into a walking tattoo parlor. He's been in juvenile hall ever since. People at my school now call him Lil 6x99. Boy did he F up his life. When I was in high school I used to come up with get rich quick schemes on a daily basis. Well, I used to dognap family pooches that were papered and expensive and loved. I did this for 2 reasons. No better feeling than watching a family reunite with their dog they thought was gone forever, whether it was lost, dead or taken. To witness that is fulfilling. Secondly, I did it cause the reward would be offered and I needed money. This was in 2004. Of course all my friends wondered how I had money all the time with no job and why I couldn't hang out all the time. I told them I'd be dog sitting. Eventually it was gonna be no good anymore if I continued to miraculously find all these dogs that go missing. So I started cutting my friends in when they'd take a dog back and we'd split the reward. Yeah, one friend, after we graduated, just decided he'd do it himself and have all the money to himself. Well, yeah, that would be smart had I not saved every fucking dog in town my senior year. He took the same dogs multiple times based on rewards, thinking nobody would say what the fuck. Eventually law enforcement set up an investigation and eventual sting, if that's what you'd call it. It was so much more than they imagined. He was doing it throughout the Pacific Northwest and had crews working for him. But wait, there's more. He got rewards from fucking businesses for being a hero in all these different counties. Newspapers published sheets like that which led to others rewarding him as a hero, saving grace, normal citizen, just right place right time. He's in prison now, sentenced to 15 years. He still has 2 more states that get him after he gets put of the state prison he's in now.